Hey guys, this is Adam at the Astro Imaging channel. Today's topic is DSLRs versus CCDs. It's a topic that anyone getting into astro imaging is going to come across. I don't think it's a controversial topic because I think a lot of people are going to know when they get into it what's going to be appropriate for them. And I'll get into a little bit about that as I go on. Rather than jumping back and forth, I'm going to first start just by giving you some advantages and disadvantages of DSLR cameras. And the main advantage in my mind of a DSLR is that it's very versatile because you can use it for terrestrial photography as well as astrophotography. You know, for family photos, they're great. There are a lot of reasons you'd want to have a DSLR, and you may already have a DSLR lying around. So for that reason alone, I'd just say it's a great, for a beginner, it's a great place to look. Some people are gadget oriented and they don't think I should start at this starting point. I should buy the best right off the bat as soon as I can, and that's fair enough. Some people can go that way, but if you were a beginner coming into a DSLR, I would probably recommend looking at it, or excuse me, coming into an astro camera, I would look at a DSLR, and I would hope you already have one. And here's why. DSLRs tend to be less expensive than CCD cameras. That's not always the case, but with astronomy cameras, a lot of the time we'll suggest using a starter price point DSLR as opposed to a high-end DSLR. That's not always the case. High-end DSLRs have larger sensors, but the starter price points DSLRs tend to have similar features to what I'll call up to the prosumer DSLRs. I have to get into sensor size to kind of explain a little bit of that, but I will do that. When you're buying, and let me get into it now. When you're buying a DSLR, you have two choices of sensors. You can buy an APS-C size sensor, which is, when it comes to astronomy cameras, a large sensor. It's and that is one of the biggest benefits of DSLRs. Their sensors are very large for the price. My Canon XS has an APS-C sensor, and it is I bought it new for I think $450. If I had to sell it used, it would be, it's modified, but it would be $300, maybe less than that, probably less than that actually. So it's for the price, they are just great packages, and at the same time, and I'm sorry, APS-C versus full frame. Excuse me, APS-C. So mine is an APS-C size sensor, and my XS, I'm sorry. And when the alternative to an APS-C size sensor would be a full frame sensor. Full frames tend to be the professional cameras that the pros are using. What's the benefit of a full frame camera? Well, the full frame camera actually has a larger sensor, so it can have larger pixels. That will allow it to pick up more light and give you what appears to be less noise. This applies in terrestrial photography, but it also is somewhat relevant for astrophotography. More so than in terrestrial photography, we have to overwhelm our sensor with light. We want to overwhelm our sensor with light. I should say, terrestrial photography overwhelms our sensor with light. We need to expose for a long time to overwhelm our sensor with light. But by using larger pixels, we're kind of giving ourselves a big benefit. We can accumulate more photons per pixel, which makes it appear as if there's less noise. And that's, I don't want to go too much into the technicalities of full frames and APS-C size sensors, but when you're buying a DSLR camera, those are your main two choices, and there is nothing wrong with an APS-C sensor. That's what's going to be in most DSLRs. Again, DSLRs are very versatile. You can use them with lenses, which is a very good option. You've heard us speak of this a lot on the Astro Imaging channel. Lenses are priced really well. They tend to be really fast. I'm sorry, excuse me. They tend to be really fast. They tend to actually perform really well relative to telescopes. And this kind of applies to cameras, to DSLRs as well. Canon, they have massive budgets. Nikon, they have massive budgets. So even though they may not be giving us exactly what we want in Astro cameras, they give us a great package. Using just their R&D, they come out with great cameras, and we get to take advantage of that. So they're versatile. They take lenses well. You can put them on a tripod and take terrestrial nighttime photography, but using terrestrial objects. And there are a lot of photographers out there that do beautiful work like this. It's definitely worth a try, and you can do it relatively easy with a DSLR camera. It's not the territory for CCDs. It becomes very difficult for CCDs when you have terrestrial objects in the frame. Not saying it can't be done, but 99% of the time you see a photograph like that, probably 99.9, it's going to be a DSLR. When you're picking a DSLR, the two main brands are Nikon and Canon. Astrophotographers seem to favor Canon considerably. Canon has introduced astronomy-specific cameras, the 20DA and the 60DA, and I think doing that and some other things they do with their sensors leads astrophotographers to use them in particular as a brand. Nikon has done a lot to merge the gap. There used to be an issue with Nikons that no longer really exists with the new Nikons, but that put them at a disadvantage, and kind of that's why there's been such a reluctance to adopt Nikons. At the same time, Backyard EOS, Ghislaine was on last week, that's done more for Canon cameras than anything else. It's just made it so easy to use and so easy to actually set up your imaging runs and frame and focus that the combination of Backyard EOS and Live View really does a lot. And in some cases can actually do a little bit better than some CCDs. The immediate visualization that DSLRs give you is better than CCD cameras. At the same time, DSLRs do not require laptop computers. Now, I like having my laptop computer out. I'm going to suggest that if it's not your first or second time out with your DSLR, still bring your laptop computer out. Hook it up USB to your laptop computer. Get Live View on. Get your focus that way. Schedule your imaging runs that way, because you're going to see a lot of benefits to that. That is the benefit of the DSLR. You know, it's even though it has an LCD on the back, Live View really helps to make sure you're in focus, really give you all of the features and functionality that you need. And I think that if you bring a laptop out with you, you're going to be guiding at some point if you stick with it. Get used to it. It'll help you notice issues quicker. It'll help you troubleshoot them quicker. And I think it's a good way to go. I had mentioned the Canon 20DA and the Canon 60DA earlier, what these cameras these are factory modified Canon cameras. When you buy a DSLR camera, it is typically not modified, and what I mean by that is astro imagers take a particular filter that's inside of our camera out, and we tend to replace it with a clear glass filter or a UV infrared filter, And the reason we do this is that particular filter is intended to cut down on a particular wavelength of light that we're interested in, particularly H-alpha light. Camera manufacturers tend to make this particular filter a little bit blinder to that H-alpha light. I'm not quite sure why. I think they I think they believe that it gives you richer colors by eliminating that, but for terrestrial photography, it's not necessarily advantageous in their mind.
The reason they put those filters in the first place is because that particular area of light way up in the infrared and near infrared was particularly sensitive to heat. And so the cameras were actually sensing heat as much as light. And the old story, and I don't know how true it is, but the old story is that you could actually see body parts underneath clothes because they were radiating in that particular temperature. And so it does give a better color balance overall, and it gives you more of what you're actually after, the light instead of the heat. So that's why the infrared, a lot of the infrared is there. Gives you a better color balance.
Thank you, Alex. But in general, we're after it. We're after that infrared modification. We want to see that light. So we do have our cameras modified. Canon did us a favor and they released this 60DA. They listened to us and they asked what we wanted, us lowly astronomers. And I was really excited about it when it first came out, and it's a great camera, but I already had an infrared modified camera, and it was modified by a member of Cloudy Nights, Gary Honus, and I've come to learn as the 60D's been out for a little while that Canon might not have used the best filter in that particular camera, so it doesn't tend to get quite as much H-alpha light as a user-modified Canon camera. That said, you're killing your warranty when you modify a camera, so it's a fine balance. And as well, with the price of the 60DAs coming down a little bit, I think they kind of have dropped a little bit. That it's a tougher decision to make. But you can buy a base level Canon. I think the current one is an SL1, but they also have right now, what are they on, the T5i, I think. Any of those would be perfectly fine, as would a T4i, a T3i, a T2i. They've done a good job for a number of years now. So you don't have to have the best and the greatest to do astrophotography. Now, if you're a photographer and you have a 60D, or excuse me, a 6D or a 5D MK3, a full frame camera, use it. You're going to appreciate having it. But if you're a newcomer coming into the hobby, don't think that you're going to buy this great camera and that's going to be what creates your great images. Most of us are using APS-Cs. When you do get into a full frame camera, one thing you have to pay attention to is you're going to need to use better lenses and better telescopes. The lens that you're using has to illuminate the entire large sensor of that full frame, and that is it's great having a full frame, but that is one thing you have to pay attention to when you're doing it. I am not certain whether my Edge HD800 would illuminate a full frame. I mean, I know it would have considerable vignetting, but I don't even know if I would have a rectangular image or whether I would have a somewhat circular image. That could be a possibility. So that's one thing to pay attention to. Now, we're getting these bargain scopes coming out now. The AT65ED, the William Optics are both reported to cover a full frame sensor really well. So that's, if you have one of those, very well suited to a full frame. But I guess the point is, don't think you have to have the latest and greatest. APS-C sensor's fine, and you're going to see why when I go into CCDs. Because...
Could I interrupt here for a second?
Yes.
There are some people who have the digital cameras already. If you've got one, go ahead and start using it if you haven't yet. Okay, whatever it is. If you haven't bought one, and as was said, any of the products that are out now, particularly the Canon products, are particularly good at any of the levels: the consumer models, the prosumer models, or certainly the professional models. And whether you get them modified or not, that, as you know, you just heard that discussion. But if you're going into the used market, you definitely want to try to buy something that has live view, and buy something that has one cable connections to the computer, so that you don't need two cables. Basically, if you stay away from the older ones, the 350, I think, and below, somebody can correct me on that, you'll be okay. That's just a piece of advice for those of you who are listening in here or are going to be listening later that want to know, you know, if what you got's okay. What you got can be used for sure. If you haven't got something, at least get something, you know, get past the 350 in the Canon series. Okay?
Yeah, that's a great point. Try and make sure it has live view. That's the #1 feature that really makes it so much easier. I always forget the number designations, but the XS is the least expensive camera right now on the used market. It's discontinued. That would have live view. The XSI is actually a 14-bit camera versus the XS is 12-bit camera, the way it converts the ADU. I would almost lean towards the XSI if you're looking for the used market, but this is a 6-year-old camera, so you've got a lot of time there to find it. You could buy, you'll find them inexpensive enough. But that live view is a great feature, and also the single USB plug. That's keep that. That's a good point as well. I think that if you don't have with the Nikons, maybe a few of them needed that. I'm not as familiar with Nikon, so I'll apologize for that. I'm sorry. Jumping over to CCD cameras. CCD cameras tend to be more expensive.
Can I make a comment on Nikon before you go on?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with Nikon with astrophotography, at least relatively speaking to Canon. But it's very difficult to speak of Nikon because they use different sensors in different cameras, unlike Canon. Lately, they've been using the Sony sensors, which are quite good for astrophotography. In fact, some of the ratings I've seen are ahead of all the Canons, and they're not all expensive. Some of them you can get for under $400, and they have an excellent sensor. And they also have some hacks that they've put out that basically eliminate everything that Nikon is doing in the raw image, so you're getting a pure raw image. I know a lot of people are using them just as a clear right through, you know, or you can use a favorite filter or something like that. And with Sequence Generator Pro, which I use, by the way, with the Nikon camera, we certainly have support. And I hear the backyard Nikon is also out. So I don't want to start a Canon Nikon war or discussion, but I'm just saying if you're starting off new, is incorrect. And if you take a look, I would almost say you can get what's available, but I certainly wouldn't stay away from Nikon because of what they did 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, if you have a Nikon camera, try using it. Actually, thank you for that. Thank you for giving us that information. Do I hear someone else talking?
There's a question coming in on the Q&A, I think, from Nilesh Thakur. I'm not sure if this is the right question for the topic we are discussing, but how would you compare the megapixel array, say a 12 megapixel APS-C to a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor?
You know, it's really hard to say. You would normally say that you want your sampling size to be appropriate, but DSLR with the megapixel race, it's forcing everything's oversampled. And normally I would say, oh no, you know what, we just don't need this, we just don't want this. And with astro imaging, it isn't very helpful going beyond sampling to a certain point. So if you're considering an APS-C sensor that's, say, 8 megapixels versus 12 megapixels versus 18 megapixels, I don't think you have to chase the highest one. There isn't a real need to get as many megapixels out there as possible. And I'm going to assume that noise levels on each camera is similar. If the higher megapixel camera has the same noise levels, then I'd probably take the higher megapixel camera. And that's kind of the odd part of the megapixel race. Just when you go and say, you know what, we don't really need more megapixels. We don't need our file sizes to get bigger. Well, then Sony comes around and develops some really good sensors that have really high megapixels and have low noise, and you're pretty much just getting more megapixels for free. So it's a really hard thing when it comes to astro imaging. I mean, it's really hard to answer that question. If anybody has comments on that, I'd love to hear them, but I don't think it's that important.
I would agree with you. I want you to consider, first off, where you are displaying your pictures. For nearly all of us, we are displaying our pictures on a computer screen, and that computer screen is X number of pixels across by Y number down. Now, it gets a little more complicated because you're going to be cropping sometimes and throwing out edges and stuff like that. But basically, any more pixels than that, you're going to have to downsize them to transmit them around. Now, if you're really dedicating yourself to reproducing this in on paper and photographs, you know, printing them out like that, well, that may be a slightly different question. But for most of us, swapping files out on the net, you really don't need a great number of megapixels. Secondly, the physics of this stuff is that the larger the sensor, the more light it can gather. If you are going to stick 24 megapixels on a piece of real estate that is only this big by that big, then those sensors can only be this small. But if you're only putting 8 megapixels of them out, you know, 8 million of them out there, they can be that much larger. So they can gather that much light. Except the physics isn't true, and the software that goes along with that physics isn't true to form, because it keeps getting better and better as we go along. And that's the point that was brought up, that if you can get them for free, go ahead and take them. Realize that you're going to have, it's going to slow down your computer when you're processing it and all that other stuff, but those are temporary pains. You will eventually get more resolution out of it.
Yes, and actually, a question just came in from the chat. Megapixels past the seeing doesn't help, right? And that's pretty much true. But I think this is what touches on if you're getting them for free. So say your seeing is let's say your seeing is just 2 to 4 arc seconds, a broad range, but once a year it's 1 arc second. It's free once a year. Is it worth it for you? Maybe. But at the same time, nobody's going to ask you specifically if you want more megapixels in your camera, and then they're going to act on that. We're just going to have to take what Canon and Nikon deliver to us, and we're just going to have to hope that they continue improving it, which they seem to do. Sony, I have full confidence in Sony. They keep on putting out great product, and we're kind of going to touch on that in the CCD side. With that, I'm going to kind of jump over. First, I want to check. Oh, Mike Miller made a great point. When you have a DSLR modified, you can use a specific filter that'll turn it back to a terrestrial camera. And this is something I should say. When you modify your camera, your DSLR, your terrestrial photographs are going to change. They're going to get an ugly red hue to them. You can white balance it out, or you can get a filter that re-adds that, that recuts that bandwidth that you'd be losing, that you were losing previously, or that you had opened it up to. You can also white balance it out, and I've actually had good luck with just changing the white balance. It's probably not the best way, but it's been sufficient for me to get pictures of my kids, pictures of the outside, stuff that really, it never really bothered me. Glenn is asking if you're making your guiding more difficult with more megapixels as well. The ratio of guide pixels to image pixels. That becomes an issue of sampling, where if you're sampling beyond your mount's capabilities, yes, you are making guiding more more difficult. Not so much guiding the mount, but having the actual imaging camera being so precisely guided by it that you might notice some more. You would notice more issues. That said, you'll have well-sampled stars. It's kind of a balance. So I think, and with DSLRs, we're all oversampling. So, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm oversampling with my DSLR. It depends on the lens you're putting on it. But if the megapixel race continues, we're all going to be oversampling with DSLRs. Trying not to take too much time on DSLRs, because I'm going to go back to them towards the end. CCD cameras are a lot more expensive. I want to say, someone could correct me on this, but I think the cheapest CCD camera that I would consider usable for deep sky is probably the Attic 420, which I think is about $1,200 or $1,100. There may be some less expensive ones. That uses an older Sony chip. I think it's 2 megapixels, and you probably know the megapixel race. 2 megapixels is not much. I want to say the pixel size is in the 6 micron range, and it's, I forget off the top of my head, but like 13, maybe 1600 across. But in general, CCDs are going to be more expensive. In addition to that, you're going to need an additional software program. I already spoke of Backyard EOS. We've spoken frequently about Sequence Generator Pro. Backyard EOS, I want to say, is $35, and don't quote me on that. I don't want to undercut or over exaggerate Elaine. Sequence Generator Pro, I think, was $99, maybe $140 with the Framing and Mosaic Wizard. So Sequence Generator Pro will run CCD cameras. So that you get out relatively expensive, and Sequence Generator Pro is a great program for doing that. A lot of people that have been doing this for a while are used to Maxim DL or the Sky, and they've been these programs are very expensive, $300, $400, $500. In addition to CCDs, though, one thing I've experienced was when you spend that much on the camera, you start to say, well, you know what, I need this. And I ended up buying PixInsight along with my CCD camera. I ended up, there are a lot of things that I just didn't really anticipate buying, but when you start to invest that much money in, you start to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this limitation anymore because I have this investment in there. And that's one of the ways that CCD cameras can escalate, and prices can escalate. In addition, we talked about full frame versus APS-C cameras with DSLRs. I told you about the Attic chip, the Attic sensor, 2 megapixel with medium-sized pixels. As sensor sizes go up with CCD cameras, the price goes up considerably. High-end CCD cameras with large sensors are well over $10,000. I'll say a reasonable balance you're going to be in the $15,000 to $4,000 range, and that's going to depend on a lot. And I'm trying to get to what that a lot is, but there's one more thing that I wanted to go over. The main benefit of CCD cameras over DSLRs is that they have regulated cooling. And if you've used a DSLR, you know that you have to pay attention to the temperature. You're going to have folders set up with the temperature, or you're going to timestamp your file with the temperature so that you know what temperature it was when you took that image, so that you can take your darks of the same temperature and you're going to apply those darks in post-processing. With a CCD camera, you're going to set the temperature of the cooler inside of the camera. So all of a sudden, you don't really have to pay attention to temperature. At the same time, you're going to get the benefit of the lower temperature chip. The temperature, or excuse me, noise drops considerably as the temperature goes down. I remember my worst images of all time were these 90-degree days in the middle of the summer that I thought I could just use my DSLR and be fine, and the noise just took them, they looked awful. Now I've been imaging 70, 80, close to 90 degrees with this, and no noise. I'm at minus 10 degrees Celsius. So that's the main benefit. If you're up north, you might be able to get away with the DSLR in many more cases than if you were in, say, Texas or some hot climate where you're going to be dealing with those 90-degree days. So cooling is a big benefit, and that is what I think becomes the primary benefit of CCDs, because you do have a couple options when it comes to them. Now, keep in mind that CCDs are dedicated astronomy cameras, so they do exactly for us what we ask of them. And in that sense, you have to think of them, you have to base a little bit of your decision on what you want to do. Because when you're buying a CCD camera, you have two options, and it's almost as broad of an option as a DSLR versus CCD. You can choose a one-shot color CCD camera or a monochromatic CCD camera. A one-shot color camera takes exactly that. One shot, you get a color image. A monochromatic camera requires color filters to go in front of a monochromatic chip. The OSC camera has little filters over each pixel, and those pass the light to the photons, to the photoreceptors, where it determines what, how many kind of, in a sense, it counts photons beyond those color filter array is what that's called. So you have to choose whether you want a mono or an OSC. OSCs have red, green, green, blue pixels covering up every site. So what that means is, if you're shooting an H-alpha image, which is in the red, area region, you are actually reflecting all of the green and blue pixel light away. So when you're doing the red pixel, you're actually only using a quarter of your camera. That's with a narrowband filter. But that's actually with your camera all the time. You see, you're kind of doing it a little bit differently. With a monochromatic camera, you would take a red filter and you would put it in front of the entire sensor. So what that means is you're actually picking up on efficiency. You are going to use every pixel on your camera, unlike the OSC, and you're also going to be able to, it's going to, in a sense, give you a higher resolution image. You're going to be able to record that image without using your camera's interpolation. It's going to not guess at certain photons, and it's going to give you a purer image. Monochromatic cameras are great, are much, much better for narrowband. If you live in a light polluted area, the one thing to consider is narrowband imaging will cut through light pollution like nothing else. And if you are in a light polluted area, you know narrowband imaging is what you want to do, then I would strongly advise just looking straight at a monochromatic camera. What's the disadvantage of a monochromatic camera? Well, you don't just buy the camera. With an OSC camera, you buy the camera, you hook it up, and you're good to go. You might need a guider of some sort, an off-axis guider of some sort. But with the monochromatic camera, you need a filter wheel, you need filters. Filter wheels are expensive, and filters can be very expensive. So if your monochromatic camera costs $2,000, don't think you're done yet, because you're going to be in it for another $2,000, maybe more. With an OSC, you're in it for $2,000 and you're imaging for $2,000. So when you buy that monochromatic camera, then you go on, you have your choice of the filter wheel. You can pick a 5-place filter wheel. You can pick an 8-place filter wheel. If you're if you're shooting luminance, red, green, blue, H-alpha, O3, and S2, well, you can already see you're going to need a bigger filter wheel. You're going to need to buy all of those filters. And if you're obsessive compulsive and you start looking at the best filters, you start shopping for Astrodons, you're going to see filters that, depending on the size you need, are going to be $350, $500, $700, $1,200 each. So they do get expensive. Price is very, you know, nobody has an unlimited budget, so you always have to decide what you're going to want to spend. I get right back to it. DSLRs are a bargain. If you're starting out, you should start with a DSLR. If you don't want to spend a ton of money and then realize you're frustrated, you just don't want to deal with all of this effort, DSLRs are a great way to start. Low risk, easy in, and a lot of people are using them. The technology is really getting great. I see there are 2 questions regarding DSLRs in the Q&A. DSLR interface, T-ring to my C8. I have a 6D on the way. I see a wide 2-inch prime focus adapter for the full frame versus scope stuff. Any experience with either of them? I don't have experience with either of them. The only thing I would, I think you remember on Cloudy Nights, you might want to ask that specifically, because I just don't know about the full frame. I would almost always say wider is better, unless there happened to be a spacing issue, which there won't be with the C8 itself. I don't think it would be a matter of whether you're using a focal reducer.
I have a slightly different answer to that. I would suggest that B, Childers, go ahead and try whatever they've got. If you've already got some kind of a prime focus adapter, use it. You're talking about a C8. C8 means that you've got an F10 probably. You might have an F6.3, but you probably got an F10. If you're shooting at F10, it may not matter quite as much as if you were shooting at a shorter focal ratio because of the way the light cone is shaped. So you may get by with just the standard prime focus adapter. You don't need a wider one. If you're shooting at f6.3, well, you're going to have a smaller coverage area anyway, and you wouldn't be able to fill, I don't think you'd be able to fill the full frame probably with a C8 no matter what happens. I can tell you that my 450 and my 600 Canons, TC somethings, I don't ever remember those. I remember them by their numbers. I don't really have a vignetting problem, and I just used a standard T adapter attached to my either the field flattener or the paracord, depending on which tube I'm using, and they don't give me any real vignetting problems. My Canon 6D, which has a full frame, however, yes, I see the vignetting in the imaging. However, it can be corrected out with flat fielding relatively easy, so it's just not an issue. So, as with most things with me, remember getting back to that budget, if you've got a prime focus adapter left over from an old camera or whatever, use that first and see what you get. And then, if it's not working, you're not satisfied with it, then perhaps explore one of the others. And really, I don't know, I don't use anything fancy full frame. It's or full the wider T-rings and stuff like that. I know they exist out there, but they're not the smallest. They're not the smallest place getting into my telescope, so I'm not worried about that. Or getting into my camera, so I'm not worried about it. And I haven't had experience. Is the bottom line on that.
There was actually another question, is there a heat sink or something like that for DSLRs? And that kind of touched on cooling. Yes, there is. You can buy aftermarket thermoelectric coolers for your DSLRs, which will allow you to cool them in a regulated way to set point cooling. These are advanced modifications, though, so you really are doing something that's taking your camera out of the comfortable DSLR range and turning it into an OSC CCD. And I'm not going to disparage anyone who does that. I'm not going to say don't do that. For a long time I thought, oh, maybe I would do this with mine. For a long time I was considering scraping the Bayer array off my Canon XS. But you do get to a point where it's just easier and cheaper to sell your camera and maybe buy a cheaper OSC CCD, or even just invest towards it. Now, if it's a pure money issue, I think you're going to find that as you get into these heat sinks or thermoelectric coolers or aftermarket coolers, or there are even companies selling fully encased cooling bodies for DSLRs. They actually rebuild your DSLR, but these approach the prices of cooled CCDs, and they have a lot of the same disadvantages. For example, the DSLR, when they turn it into a case, they remove the screen, so you can't use it for a terrestrial camera. So they've pretty much taken the Canon body and put it into a cooled case, which is good. Canon does a lot of good stuff, but you're right up there with dedicated astro cameras when it comes to price. So it's hard.
And one other thing you've got to remember is, am I cutting somebody off? Okay. One other thing you've got to remember is that most of the coolers you see and most of the kits you see to cool that are coolers. They're the same as wrapping ice around your camera or something like that. Not exactly, obviously, but something like that. They don't deal with the condensation that you may be producing with that. And that's something that all our software, or all our camera engineers at QSI and FLI and SBIG, they've all got coolant desiccants in there to make sure that your chip itself does not get condensed moisture on it. Secondly, very few of these additives that you can put on your DSLR are regulated cooling, which means that while they'll cool, 20 degrees, 10 degrees less than ambient temperature, which is nice, they aren't cooling to that set to the set temperature. When you take a CCD picture, you know it's coming out at minus 20 degrees, no matter what the air is out there. But when you use some of these DSLR coolers, most of the DSLR coolers, all you know is that it's 15 degrees cooler than it is outdoors. Well, that's still, you've got the problem of matching the darks and things like that. So, yes, there are ways to cool a DSLR, but not necessarily what you're after. And I want to second that thing. If you started out with a DSLR because of the economy and the usefulness, and because you've already got one for taking pictures of the kids, and then you start adding all these things to it, at what point does this plane become too heavy to fly? You've kept adding things and adding things and adding things, and then you realize that, boy, I could have had a good camera if I'd have bought the CCD after you've added all these things to your DSLR. Okay?
And I do see Glenn saying he builds his own cooling rig for his DSLR, including a cold finger. And like I said, I'm not going to criticize anyone for doing that. I look at things a little bit differently. I hate spending other people's money. So what you're doing sounds like it'd be really cool to me. And it's something I may even want to try for myself, just to like tinker around with the camera and see what I could do out of it. But it would be hard for me to suggest to somebody to do that. And I think that that's kind of the distinction that I'll make, because we're all tinkerers. I mean, we're all, if we can figure out how to use guiding and use these telescope mounts, then I'll assume we all have some level of technical expertise or just enjoy it. So I'm not going to suggest someone not do that, but I just have difficulty suggesting that somebody go in that direction. And just as even Robert is pointing out now, you know, you put that cooler in your camera, and then all of a sudden you realize that you need some sort of glass window on the front to prevent condensation. I know SBIG puts a little heater on the glass window. So there are additional difficulties, but if it's all for fun, or if it's all kind of part of the enjoyment, then nothing's wrong with it. If I'm trying to suggest to you best way to spend your money or limited pennies, then I'm going to suggest something a little bit different. Going on to CCDs right now, and this is something we talked about earlier. There's kind of a big battle going on between Sony and I was going to say Kodak, but Kodak really isn't around anymore. It's now TrueSense. Kodak sold all of their chips, or all of their sensor designs, to this TrueSense, and this TrueSense has been pretty much living on them for the past 10 years. The CAF 8300 is probably their most common, or their most popular chip right now. But Sony just keeps on putting out new stuff, and the reports are just great all across the forums. The one issue is, and this isn't an issue in DSLRs. This is really with CCDs, but Sony tends to produce smaller sensors, and Kodak produced the bigger sensors. So what you're actually seeing is you're seeing smaller pixels in these Sony sensors, but they do have the performance that we're looking for. They actually, in many cases, have lower noise, and quantum efficiency is slightly higher than the Kodak sensors. So they're doing a great job, and everyone's just kind of hanging on it, waiting for them to come out with some really large, affordable sensors for CCDs. But why am I talking about sensors and all of this? And this might be beyond a few people. This might be, a lot of people might understand this, but it is really important to understand. If I have a small sensor and I put it on a small telescope, I hate this word, but it will magnify, it'll appear to magnify the image more than a large sensor on a small telescope. So I say magnify, but it also decreases your field of view. But when you're buying a CCD camera and you're looking at the particular telescope you have, you should buy it based on the field of view. With DSLRs, you don't really have that much of an option. So with the CCD, do you want that larger field of view? Is the CAF 8300 appropriate for you, or depending on your setup, or should you be going for something with smaller pixels? At the same time, Kodak produces a larger chip that is, even though it's $10,000, if you want that massive field of view, you can get it. And you can go online. There are field of view calculators. There are different ways to figure out exactly what type of field of view you'll get with a particular camera and a particular telescope. And you really should go in and study that, because when you're buying your DSLR, you're stuck to that full frame or APS-C. They're not as far off as the differences between the Sony and the CAF chips. The Sony and the CAF really do give you pretty different looks. I'm always surprised because I see people shooting with their Sony chips, and they'll put it on, say, an 80 millimeter refractor with something like the Sony. I don't know if it's the Sony. Excuse me, the drawing a blank here. The 690. QSI 690 or whatever it is. I forget the Sony chip on it, but whatever it was. But you get great galaxy shots with it, and I'm looking at these on like an 80 millimeter refractor, and I'm like, wow, refractors. I usually think of refractors as nebula, as nebula telescopes, and I think of RCs and SCTs, more of the galaxy, the long focal length things. But with these smaller sensors and the high megapixels within them, if you can match your sampling rate to your seeing, and you can still get a smaller chip like that, you can take advantage of that kind of magnification factor. And with DSLRs, we call it the crop factor. Full frames versus DSLRs. A full frame has a wider field of view. A DSLR has a crop factor. They call it a crop factor. They don't call it a magnification factor. Yeah, Robert posted it. The QSI 690, the ICX 814. And thank you for that, Robert. And that's
the camera I've got, so that's why I know that.
Yeah, that's a really nice camera, and I think it just came out relatively recently too. But I don't know. I think Sony's really pushing it with these, and I'm very impressed with them. I wish TrueSense was competing or really putting out new stuff, but Sony seems to be the one taking the chances, spending the R&D money, and maybe we'll be talking about them in the future. So at this point, I think a lot of people kind of know, okay, I'm starting astroimaging. Which one do I buy? Should I switch? What do I want to get out of it? And I'll come back to the same thing. If it's the temperature that's driving you nuts, then it's that regulating cooling you want. If it's light pollution that's driving you nuts, monochromatic CCDs really have a way to cut through light pollution. Specifically with narrowband, but I've noticed even with RGB, they just are really good at what they do. You know, light pollution, in a sense, is just like battling noise. It's a battle of time. You can wait it out. You can keep going, keep exposing, keep exposing, keep exposing. Eventually, the noise that is light pollution slowly dissipates. Not slowly, very, very slowly. Probably too slowly for everyone to be happy shooting from light polluted skies. You'd be better off driving to darker skies and taking a few hours there and then driving back, and you'd still end up saving time. And that's the reason I ended up going with CCD, because my light pollution is pretty bad. I wanted to do narrowband. I wanted to get great nebula shots, and it was the only way for me to do it. And you just have to think, what's limiting me? If you've spent enough time with a particular piece of equipment, you know its limitations, and you know what you want out of it. I knew I wanted a CCD camera when I was considering cooling my DSLR, and I was also considering getting modifying it or scraping off the Bayer filter or the color filter array. And at the same time, I was thinking, you know what, it would be so much easier if I just had a filter wheel on the front of it. Well, you know, what I realized was I was talking about a CCD. And I knew exactly what I wanted, and I knew that's really what I wanted to end up with. That said, I will say I'm extremely happy with my mono CCD. I'm glad I bought it, and it's made my images better. If I knew how much better it would have made my images a year ago, I would have done what I could to buy it earlier, because it really does, across the board, better sensitivity. The mono cuts through the light pollution. It's and the cooling makes life kind of easier. I think now it's not limiting me. I'm limiting it, and that's the way I like to have it because now I know I can constantly make my images better. I just have to hone my skills. I don't have to buy anything. And for the most part, that's pretty much the DSLR versus CCD presentation. So I didn't know if anyone had any specific questions, comments, or anything they wanted to bring up. Because at this point, I'm just going to kind of open it up. I see that there's some stuff in the chat, so I'm going to go through and make sure there's anything I should be bringing up. But anyone that has anything they want to get off their chest is welcome to bring it up now.
This isn't about CCD, but I apparently just got email from Bob Noya, the editor at Sky and Tel. Looks like he's going to be resigning.
Ooh, really?
So, yeah, it was interesting. You know, it looks like he's just making some changes and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting news. Again, it's not about astroimaging, but Bob has been a real asset to Sky and Tel for quite some time now. What, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? Well,
As long as
anyway,
I'm a subscriber.
yeah, back to work here. How many people out there, and you don't have to raise your hands if you don't want to, whatever, but how many people out there really want to know, about the top end of what they're going to be doing? I think the big difference between a CCD and a DSLR, it's expressed in different ways. Some people say you've got more control with a CCD than you do a DSLR. Some people, whatever. But it just seems to me that that you can eventually make a better picture with a CCD than you can with the DSLR. Now that says nothing about all the people that do make wonderful pictures with DSLRs. Jerry Rodriguez, I mean, it just, they're beautiful pictures. But, when you get more data, when you can control that data better, when you can control the temperatures better, I just think that the top end of a CCD is higher than the top end of a DSLR. And for those of you who might be out there lurking, just kind of trying to figure out what the difference between a DSLR and a CCD is, I think that's where you got to go eventually, if you really want to get into it. However, there are people who have to climb Everest, and there are people who have to get to the top of Kilimanjaro, and there are people who have to hike the Inca Trail, and there are lots and lots and lots of us who just like hiking around in the mountains around the house, If that's what you can do what you can do. Do whatever it is you want to do. But I just think the CCDs have higher top ends, and so when I see the arguments on cloudy nights or whatever about which is better, I just, that's my opinion. So there.
I'd like to step in on that, if possible. Going from a DSLR to a CCD, I think DSLR is the way to go for a beginner. It's perfect. It gives you your information right away. It helps, the beginner learn their equipment and stuff like that. For myself, it was that I got to the point where I was trying to do 5-10 minute subs in Western New York, where it's, we get the heat, we get the humidity, we get the dew, and it was a combination of everything that I was just getting too much noise with my camera, and so I ended up upgrading to the CCD. But DSLR is ideal for any beginner to go with because it's gives you everything that you need to learn to start, because you got to not only take the images, you got to learn how to process your images also. And then once you get to the point of being able to max out your images, and start getting sick of the noise, you end up looking towards going CCD. And then I guess the next question to that would be is, do you go mono or do you go one-shot color? And I guess it's a personal preference of what you're going to want to do. And I guess your location, I guess, because I know friends who wanted one-shot colors only, and then others that said you have to go mono. For me, I just decided to go mono. I felt, I had the ability to be able to do the filtering and stuff like that, and I've never looked back at it. I love it.
Did you notice Sami's question coming in? Sami Al-Deseri over on, I guess he's in the Q&A. I'm upgrading from DSLR to CCD and between color and monochrome, and I live in a high light pollution area and almost bad hot weather all year. My question is, what is the best? And just from what I just said, my answer would be you're going to have to go CCD eventually, and I'll add to that, and I'm going to take your question apart bit by bit a little bit, and others, of course, comment on it. Between color and monochrome, which should you choose? If you choose color, you're generally going to have a less efficient camera. So you're going to have to expose longer, expose deeper, a whole lot more stuff than if you go monochrome with good filters. And I think that Adam covered that pretty well when he was talking about it. In a highly light polluted area, you're going to have to use probably some kind of light pollution filters, and the best, strongest light pollution filters are called narrowband filters. They only let in a very, very skinny slice of light, and they don't let in the light that's where the sodium lamps are, or the mercury vapor. Well, they don't make mercury vapor lamps, but they don't let in the light where the light pollution is. So right now I'm about to start imaging in my backyard, and I live in the Los Angeles suburban light dome here, but I'm going to be imaging from my backyard using my narrowband filters. Then your third part of your question, which is bouncing right up the page here as it goes along here, that you have hot weather all year round. I live in Southern California, and it'll be October 2nd or 3rd next Friday, and they tell me it's going to be over 100 degrees here. So, that's really, really hot, and it's been hot. Again, you're going to need a cooler, and you're going to need regulated cooling, so we come back to having a CCD. There is a question some people ask about whether it's easier to take pictures with a one-shot color camera or multiple filters and then having to combine the multiple filters back into one exposure. And as far as I can tell, I've watched people taking one-shot colors. I've taken one-shot colors with my DSLR, and as far as difficulty, there's not much of a difference. I mean, the software does all the work for you. You don't have to do it. The software does it. So, in answer to your question, Sami, I would be buying the lowest noise, largest chip, APS-C size chip, something like in the 8300 series, CCD camera with regulated cooling, and I'd be getting myself a good set of narrowband filters. And depending on your budget, that good may mean the $1,100 version from Astrodon, or it may be the $240 version from Orion. But that's what I would be doing.
Yeah, I would reiterate a little bit of what Alex said about monochromatic CCDs. If you want the absolute best image, that's going to be what you get. That does not mean you can't get great, amazing images with anything less. It's just if you want to get the absolute best, that's the direction you're going to be going in. Just like you're going to be getting narrower filters, just like you're going to be getting more aperture. There are certain things that are always better. More quantum efficiency is always better. And when you're starting with a monochromatic camera, you're starting in a better place. It comes down to the physics of it. I guess I can see now chat blowing up, so I want to see if any of these are there. Michael Miller points out disadvantage to a mono is getting the focus tuned between filters and more gradient issues, which is a good point. I actually experienced that with mine. gradients in the luminance filter, and I actually don't shoot with luminance now because of those gradients. But focus tune between, yes, definitely an issue. I look at that as a cost issue though, because it's easily overcomable by spending $500 to $800 on an automatic focusing system. But it's funny because if a college were to come to me and say, we're setting up a observatory, what CCD camera do we need? I would say, well, of course, you need a monochromatic with filters. But if a good friend were to come up to me and say, what camera do I need? I'm getting a telescope. I'd say a DSLR. So it really just depends on what you're looking for, and it's hard for me to tell you what camera you want, but that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, Adam, because it's, for a friend, you want to make sure that they're not overwhelmed. Again, the beginner DSLR, and then with the college, they're going to have the money and the ability to be able to spend it on a higher camera, get the mono, get the narrowband, get the filters and everything that's required for that. So I have to agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
Adam, there's a question coming in from Michael Jobin on Q&A, I think, and it says, I felt the heat at the bottom of my camera when I take video. Does the camera video section used in the stills, and would that get the sensor hot? Just thinking of a bottom-mounted heat sink. I don't know the physics of where your heat sink would best go. Where it needs to be cooled is, of course, the chip. And it's hard to get to the chip on a CCD without doing some major surgery and stuff like that. But it does give us a chance to mention that anytime your camera is taking pictures, anytime your camera is on, it's generating heat. And particularly if you spend a long time just looking through live view, trying to frame your shot and all that other stuff, yeah, you're heating up your Canon, you're heating up your camera, and yeah, it'll show. On the other hand, most of these things, they kind of get to a level, and that's the level that they're going to be at given an ambient temperature. So I don't know how much it matters, but the less you can use your camera, I mean, if you can keep it from getting warm during the day, and then when you take it out at night, it's better for the camera. But eventually, yes, whenever the camera's on, it heats up. As far as your more specific question, Michael, just thinking of a bottom-mounted heat sink, I think if I'm going to heat something, I want it heated generally wherever it's supposed to, wherever it's hot. I don't want to heat one or cool one portion of it and let the others stay hot, because then I get a gradient and stuff like that. But I really don't know the answer to that question, Michael, about where to put your heat sink. Somebody else was mentioning that they've actually done a heat sink with a cold finger and all that other stuff. I'll shut up and let them talk.
Yeah, that person is welcome to talk if they want to. I mean, the absolute best is to get as close to the sensor as possible. We had a chat in the cloudy nights. Can you just put a fan on the back of the like, say the T3i, I believe, has a flip-out screen. Can you just put a fan or something really, really good right there? I don't know, just to cut it down 5 degrees Fahrenheit, just a little bit. Maybe you could do that. Somebody suggested putting it in the tripod mount. Maybe the cold would conduct through it. I mean, it's tough. You're probably talking 5-10 degrees. You're probably talking a minimum help, unless you really do get away into the camera and try and get it up against that sensor. Maybe a cooler box would do a little bit better if you could get it cold enough. I mean, it's kind of the same as some other things. I have an air-cooled computer next to me. I thought about doing liquid cooling on it, but I have my fan right on my CPU. So the closer you could get it, the better. And that's not my expertise. So. Oh yeah, Glenn. And Glenn said live view gets the camera hot, and I want to point that out. Yes, live view does get the camera hot. Leave it. I used to leave 3 to 5 minutes after turning live view on and off if I had a long focusing routine. And there were a couple times when I was just starting out that I forgot and left live view on. This is pre-backyard EOS days, and it blew all of my shots. They all had an orange glow to them. This is with my Canon XS, and I really think that post Canon XS, they really got rid of all of that stuff. Even the XS doesn't suffer from amp glow, which is something that previous cameras had. But yes, live view does heat up the camera.
Hey, one thing I would like to mention, this is Sean. So, yeah, CCDs are better than DSLRs, right? But for people like me that are on a budget, they really are an awesome tool, especially if you modify them. Like, I modified mine myself. It was only the cost of $100 for the filter, and then maybe a couple of screwdrivers. So it was really cost effective. And the one thing that I'd like to point out is I don't think most people reach the limit of their DSLR before moving on to a CCD, because there are people that are extremely good at imaging with a DSLR, a modified DSLR, and I've seen a lot of CCD images that don't match the skill level that's required. I think if you're going to move on from a DSLR, I think people just move on to better equipment without having the skills required to move on to the better equipment. So that's all I really want to say.
That's why I definitely think DSLRs have a strong place. When I bought my DSLR, if you told me that I'd be buying a CCD camera for this price, I'd say, no, I'm never going to buy that. People who spend that much money on this stuff are crazy. And sure enough, at some point it turned out that I was the crazy one. Did I get the most out of my DSLR? No. I probably could have driven to darker skies, but at the same time, I knew I wanted to do narrowband. And Sean, you're doing narrowband now, so it really is a matter of just what you want to invest in it, how much you want to spend, and I don't know. You do have to take budget strongly into consideration. And one thing I will say is, I found this through a lot of hobbies I've had. The first few $100 goes a long way, and the next few $1,000s are for small incremental upgrades, or they tend to be. You know, your DSLR takes a pretty darn good picture, and the CCD takes a little bit better of a picture. So I've noticed that through a lot of different hobbies, whether it's sports cars or bikes or whatever it may be. It's one thing I've experienced. And I see Mike saying his new soon-to-be home is his screen share, and I see an observatory in there. I don't know. Or maybe it's his avatar there.
No, just click on his click on it down there. Click the observatory.
Oh, duh. I'm sorry. I wasn't screen sharing. That's pretty nice. Is that your private observatory, Mike? That's beautiful. Wow.
How many people you got to share that with, Michael?
That's not a private observatory.
That's a whole bunch of people down
Yeah.
at the New Mexico skies or something, right?
What? Oh, okay, Sierra Remote. I knew you moved away from New Mexico skies.
Oh, okay. Are you and Warren still sharing? Michael, are you out there, or are you just on chat?
Yeah, well, no, I'm unmuting so you can hear me.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I'm driving to New Mexico Wednesday, and I'm picking up Warren's equipment and my equipment and taking it back to Sierra Remote. And Ken Crawford's going to clean Warren's scope, and then is going to help me collimate it. And then hopefully, I wish your session was about a month earlier, Alex, because for the first time I've got to set up an ME and an MX. And, you know, I've never had to do it because I had an AP mount before. So I got to learn.
Yeah. Michael, tell them what you're referring to, my session.
Oh, the Paramount session that they're going to be holding in, what's it, mid-November, down outside of LA in desert area, they're going to be doing a live demo of Paramount equipment. And I wish I could go, but I'm going to be in Texas.
Yeah. We have 10 acres out in the desert, our club does, and we got approached by Software Bisque to act as the host. They're bringing their engineers and their software people and stuff like that, and we've got about 5 Paramounts on our site, and or more, I think, and there'll be people bringing them in, and we're going to have a star party down there, and if you've got a Paramount, you can come on down there, and they're just going to work with you for a day, showing you all the ins and outs of how to run a Paramount, how to set it up, how to replace the motherboard. I heard one of our club members is going to have his motherboard replaced so that they can, all that stuff. So it's just one of those things. So anyway. Are there other questions on DSLRs and stuff? DSLRs and CCDs? By the way, there is one really good combination of things, I think, in my mind. To have both a CCD and a DSLR. I use my CCD when I'm taking most of my pictures out either in the desert or at home here. I've got observatories in both places, and but there are certain things like comets and stuff like that that I want one-shot color for, and by using my DSLR I can do that. Also, a lot of skyscapes, when you're taking the whole Milky Way or something like that, you don't want to mess with the CCD. You want a 100 millimeter, telephoto lens or something like that, short telephoto, or a wide angle 14 millimeter, taking the whole Milky Way. You don't want to do that with the CCD. You want to do it with the DSLR. So there are real advantages in doing it. And comets, I think, are one-shot color is important.
Yeah, they might move a little bit too much for the filters.
Yeah. Also, DSLRs make very, very good planetary cameras for taking pictures of planets, with their movie modes in particular.
Yeah, Backyard EOS does a great job cropping that center, as Elaine mentioned last.
Most CCDs don't do well with planetary, do they?
Nope.
They don't have high frame rates, right?
Exactly. You need the high frame rate. Yep. All right. Do we have any other questions, whether that's related to DSLR versus CCD or unrelated?
I have a question real quick. So let's assume that you could have a DSLR that was cooled and set point cooling to say the equivalent of the camera that you have, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's say you've got the cooling the same. How much difference do you think you would really see in the pictures if you took the same exposure lengths using the same equipment?
Well, I have to go by kind of hearsay here. I've heard that modern DSLRs quantum efficiency is it used to be in the 40, and I think now it's in the 55% range, but this is, remember, it's behind the CFA. The modern CCD cameras are, depending obviously on the wavelength, but anywhere between like 55 and 70, maybe 75% QE. So I think that the CCDs eke it out, but that's QE, which is pretty important. So when I say it ekes it out right at the perfect spot. The perfect spot because you're getting more photons recorded, which is really the best way to do it. It's one thing to lower noise, it's another thing to just record more photons. So and then if you're in dark skies, I mean, I think that it would be close, but I think that the CCD would probably go a little bit deeper, and you'd probably just notice it a little bit more, be a slightly better. Not massively better, but obviously we're talking about a hypothetical camera because the DSLR, if you get good cooling, that's cooling it that much, and it's not condensing, and it's working properly, you've spent a lot of money to get it there. So it's kind of the balance.
Okay,
So
thanks.
just, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so from what I'm listening, I have a DSLR and I was looking at getting a CCD. My skies are fairly dark. In fact, my pollution problem is moisture. I live right on a lake. So I don't think CCDs would help with it, but if it would, you could let me know. The second thing is I live in a very cold climate. I'm in Canada up here. And listen to you guys talk about heat all year like a problem. I wish we could trade a bit. I usually image between -10 and -20. Most of my images are taken there, so I don't want cooling. I'm cool enough. So I guess what I was trying to figure out is there an advantage to going, and if I would go to CCD, I go narrow band, obviously, because I don't see much advantage, as you pointed out, in the one-shot color. So is there much of advantage? I know there's an advantage, but to justify the cost, I could afford it, but I want to feel I'm getting some value for my money.
I think you would see an advantage. You're going to be going deeper in each object. Now, it's hard to say because if your skies are dark, a lot of the limitations that a lot of us deal with, you're not dealing with. But I think at the same time, you are going to be. I think at the same time, you are going to be able to go a little bit deeper. It's.
I also suffer from Sean's comment he made earlier. If I really was mastering my camera, and what was limiting me was my camera, I might be inclined to do that. But the other point is there's a lot. I mean, there's so much to learn, and I don't really think it's an equipment problem. But you know, I could be wrong.
That piece of advice about figure out what's slowing you down. There's a lot of people that just go out and say it, assume it's the equipment. For me, it's not the equipment. I mean, I know I don't have the best equipment out there, but for me, it's the processing and the ability to actually see what I'm supposed to be looking at. People say, see that gradient? And I look at it and go, nope, I'm sorry, I don't see the gradient. And then they point it out to me and they take the gradient out, and now I see the gradient, but I can't see it naturally. So in a sense, my bad part is my own personality and my inability to process properly. So I could buy more equipment if I wanted to, I guess, but it wouldn't do me any good. One other thing, though, I want to back up. The way that question was asked, it sounded like you think there's one-shot color and there's narrow band. In between, there's LRGB. And I want you to be sure you know that. But am I making a mistake there? Or yes, there is one-shot color where one shot gets you the red, the green, the blue, and the luminance, I suppose. And there's narrow band where you just take a slice of the spectrum in 3 or 4 different positions. But in between, there's the broadband red, broadband blue, broadband green, and you get a couple of hundred nanometers worth of spectrum in each of those bands. So there's that. If you're living in a very dark place, that is what you would want to be using with your CCD, not necessarily narrowband. We use narrowband here in light pollution because it cuts through the light pollution. It also gives us weird artificial colors because S2, for instance, which is red, we have to assign either green or blue or red and make something. We make the blue stuff green and stuff like that, so it comes out a little weird. But there's something in between narrowband, and I don't want our discussion here emphasizing narrowband to make somebody think there isn't something in the middle.
You know,
Is there any way we can shoot through? Like when I say I have dark skies, you could look at them and not agree, but it's not pollution. I have a lot of moisture. You should see the color of my subs that come out. and you should see the way the guns are spread out. So that would be my issue. It's not like my sky is pitch black or anything. It's just not light pollution.
Is it the aurora?
No, there's a lot of that too. And by the way, for you Southerners that like to see, you don't really want to. But the first 2 times it's nice. After that, it gets in the way.
Talking about your moisture content in the air is really high.
Yeah, I'm living next to a lake, literally, and especially this time of the year, it's the worst. The temperature, to give you a Celsius, for example, it was 26 yesterday. When I was imaging, it was getting close to freezing.
Yeah, then that's going to be a real problem for you. When
I don't bother with darks. I stopped using darks almost a year ago.
When your problem is going to arise when your water temperature is warmer than your air temperature as fall comes and stuff like that, because you're going to have a lot of moisture evaporating up into the atmosphere, and the moisture that's close to the ground that you're trying to shoot through is going to disperse a lot of light, and you're going to be very limited in how long you can shoot for. And there's really not a lot you can do about that, because you can't make that moisture go away. Nothing's going to block it, and the light is just going to reflect back. There's not the best thing you can do is get as far away from it as you can.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, my observatory was right on the edge. So I mean, there's a lot of trees around here, so that was the best location. But I'm not complaining. Heck, I think I'd rather have it than the pollution. It does go away for part of the year, the light pollution in it.
Yeah, you're better off having a little bit of humidity than light pollution. You'll get rid of the humidity in the winter.
The other thing I was going to mention for people trying to cool the DSLRs, I am surprised how many people use batteries instead of an AC adapter. I know it doesn't seem like much, but those things can get pretty hot, especially when you're running them all night.
Yeah, I forgot to mention AC adapters. I use an AC adapter, and I wouldn't run batteries. Just a pain in the butt to have to change them, and if you bump your camera while you're changing them, then you might be in trouble. If you bump your mount while you're changing them, then you're in big trouble.
Adam, we've got a couple of questions came in on the Q&A. What about video with DSLR for planetary imaging? Yeah, that's definitely a way to go. When you've got your DSLR, the Canon, I've heard. I mean, I can't take a planetary image worth beans. But from what I've heard, Backyard EOS is very powerful on doing that. I think we kind of mentioned that. And
I would disagree with that, Alex. When I tried it, it would not work because the video would not shoot fast enough to capture as many frames as I needed, and so that's why I originally, when I bought my T1, that was my thought process, that I would just shoot planetary, and it didn't work worth of beans. And hell, a little cheap $300 camera worked far superior, and it's because the atmosphere, if you watch the video, the atmosphere is jumping around so much, and you can see it between the frames. That's why you need a ton of frames so that you can pick out the absolute best and work it. Now, maybe something has changed since I tried it, a few years ago, and maybe the video has gotten a lot faster. But the general rule is you needed 30 frames per second minimum to be able to shoot a good planetary image.
I can pull 20 frames a second with my Canon XS and get a decent planetary image. It's not going to match like the ASIs that can pull 50, 60 frames a second, or some of the other ones, but it does a decent job.
Well, Jerry Ladrius again put out a whole book basically saying, yeah, that's what you should be using it for. I've tried it a little bit and did better than I was doing with some of the other cameras I had tried it with. But as I mentioned, I've yet to take a planetary image, a good planet image. There's another question up here. What is the most important points that you should consider when choosing a CCD?
Most important points you should choose. I hate to start with this, but set yourself a reasonable budget. If your budget's well up there, then you don't really have to choose. But knowing what your budget is going to go a long way. The OSC versus monochromatic is really going to be your primary decision, but at the same time, I mean, it's a lot of this stuff we really have gone over. At the same time, you're going to be choosing your field of view. I have this telescope. If I buy this sensor, this is the field of view I'm going to have. So between those few decisions, I think that you're going to have to kind of decide for yourself. Unfortunately, this is astro imaging, and it's not the hottest hobby, the most amazing thing coming out right now. So we're limited to such a niche market that we're never going to get those perfect sensors. We're never going to get economies of scale. So we kind of have to fend for ourselves and overpay for things that just to kind of get out of them what it is. But at the same time, we have to really know and kind of figure it out. So I don't want to answer your question with just it kind of matters, but it really does matter on what you're looking to get out of it. And you'd almost have to take everything we've already said tonight to help you decide.
I would not worry quite as much about matching your telescope to your CCD, because I think you're going to change telescopes depending on what you're after. Also, you can change binning to change what your telescope or what your sensor's seeing. So Adam and I would maybe disagree a little bit with that, or maybe we just express it a little bit differently. I would, again, go with what you're comfortable with the budget, and I would stretch your budget a little bit to get the better end of what you can. And I always look for the lowest noise whatever, because noise is the enemy of astroimaging. And so you go, you get the highest quantum efficiency, least noise you can get. There's also things like reliability, how close it is to you. Some people say if you're living on that side of the pond, you buy something made in Europe, and if you're living on this side, buy something made in the United States. I think they're all made in Asia anyway, but you know what I mean. Your service, what are the guys around you using? Because they're going to be able to give you hints as to what they're doing and how they're doing it. Which ones work with your software, although frankly nearly everything works with nearly all the software eventually. So I would buy the biggest chip, the quietest, biggest chip that I could afford.
Yep. Yeah, and I actually don't disagree with what Alex said about you're going to buy a new telescope. When you spend that on a CCD, telescopes tend to come and go. But if you this discussion might not be that relevant for you, but if you have plane wave 20 or something like that, then you might be in a little bit different of a situation. But for most of us, the camera is probably going to be one of our bigger investments relative to the telescope. Hopefully, because really good quality optics, the prices seem to be coming down. Not necessarily the great refractors, but there's some great reflectors coming out that prices are kind of shocking. So, all right, I don't know. I saw Mike Miller post. I actually want to bring this up. CCD calc. This will help you determine field of views with different sensor and scope combinations, and it's something to take a look at if you are shopping and just want to see how that works. There is a website too that does it. It might be Starzona, but I don't remember off the top of my head. It shows you a little thing, a few common objects, and lets you pick your camera and your telescope, and it'll show you exactly how it's framed out. And I think that's all I've got today. So we are still looking for for people to host. If anybody has any specific topics that they consider them specializing in, they're welcome to bring it up. You're welcome to contact me. off board or pretty much any way to make suggestions of the same. And otherwise, I don't know. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'm probably going to call it a night.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone else.
No problem. Thanks, Sean. Nice bubble.
Thanks, man.
It's definitely coming along. New spacing, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna drop it a little bit more and see if the stars get better or if it gets worse. So I'll post on Cloudy Nights and let you guys know the results. The standard T adapter is definitely not the right spacing. That's for sure.
All right. So what's your sign on Cloudy Night so I can make sure I post some great comments?
It's Sean Har, SHAWNHAR.
Okay. So all right. So let me tell you what I'm gonna say. You can't tell anything from this image on the screen, but you know what? Your tracking looks pretty darn good. Your stars are nice and round. You got some good star colors. I don't think you did bad at all.
No, that's nice.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with it. It's probably the best image I have so far. The alignment of the hydrogen alpha is not quite right, so there's some color fringing on the stars, and the spacing still isn't exactly right. So there's like the star shapes flare away from center. I mean, it's not an HD.
Well, I showed you how to get rid of that.
Yeah. I haven't done it on this yet, though.
Liquefy.
So, yeah. I haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm still trying to bring out more nebulosity and get the color right.
Well, your color.
Hey, Sean, your stars look good to me.
Oh, thanks.
I would. You know what I think? See, I'm learning this because I get told nonstop. I think you have too much green in it.
Oh yeah?
Yep.
You think so?
That's what's giving it the orange. I'll tell you how to tell. Take the image and open it in Photoshop, and in Photoshop, go under the image. I got to open Photoshop to look now. If you want to know what it looks like, go up, take your image, and then go into Adjustments. And I got to open something. Hold
Filter,
on.
isn't it? I think it's filter, right at the bottom.
Now
I learned this from Adam Block. Let me open an image. Okay. I'm going to switch mine to screen share so you can actually see it.
you know I made mine a little orange on purpose, so it wasn't so red.
Yeah, I'm not saying necessarily that it's wrong, but I just want to tell you how you can tell. I've learned two different ways.
Okay.
And one was to, all right, can you see my image up right there right now?
Hold on, I have to click your name. Hold on.
No image.
I can see the Photoshop window, but no image.
Photoshop. You might have to try full screen or something. No, you're in full screen.
Yeah, I think you actually have to maximize the image within Photoshop or something. Maybe.
Let's see. Nope, I made it smaller. Let me try full screen.
By the way, Sean, those squigglies are because I just took the stacked images and put them together. I have no flats, no darks, no biases on those. Those are just straight stacked, and I just wanted to process it and see what it looked like.
Oh, so
All right.
those could be hot pixels then, right?
I'm sorry?
So those could be hot pixels, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, can you see my image now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
Okay. All right, so you're going to go up here under Image. There's two ways to do this. Block taught me to do it this way. You go up under Image, Adjustments, Equalize. Any color variance or color saturation that's affecting everything will show up dramatically in here. If I was too green, this would all appear in a green hue around here, and I would see gradients in the background, everything. That's just my clue to show me what I've got. The other way that Hallis taught me was to take all right, where are you, bastard? Ah, no. Is to take my color chart like this, and if I take my color chart and I take it and I hold it, move it, I can actually, if I move it around or whatever, I can actually, any disparity in my background or in my colors should become very obvious to me the second I put my color wheel over the top of it and hold it next to the image.
Huh.
Oh, that's pretty cool, man.
Yeah. Gives you a frame of reference.
Yeah, it makes your eyes look at the image differently.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
When I did the equalize on mine, it came out really orange all over the image.
All right, so then let's see, what makes orange?
Yeah,
Where's
so
my
I
color wheel?
Yellow and red.
to make it not so
There we
red.
go. My color wheel, orange is coming from a combination probably of green and red. That's why I think you have too much green in it.
Right. Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah, I used lab color and then adjusted the A and B channel so it wasn't so red, which probably introduced the green.
Yeah, because anytime you move one of the sliders, if you move more from here down to here, then you're gonna get the opposite effect. Like magenta is the opposite of green, cyan's the opposite of red, yellow's the opposite of blue. So whenever you increase one, or decrease one, you'll increase the other.
Yeah, I think what I ran into is blending the hydrogen alpha into the red channel made the whole image really red.
Yeah, that's tough. You should blend in a lighten mode.
Oh yeah, I think I used screen. I'll have to go back.
No, use lighten. Lighten.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and do that again.
Now I got a question for you guys. Do you guys calibrate your monitors like with that? I've seen people use that Spider. You can buy that.
Yeah, I have a
thing.
Spider 3 Express.
And is that really helpful?
Well, it helps to get the colors right, but I'm still half the time green blind, and I will tell you that my friends that I send my images to before I ever post them, I hear probably 50% of the time that the image is too green, and I can't seem to see it myself. But other people, they can see it in a second. The other thing Crawford told me is that, like, when you've been working on an image a long time, you become blind to what you're seeing. And so he said, step away, take your image, and rotate it. Oh, what the hell? I didn't auto color, you dumbass.
Look too green to me.
Yeah. Just rotate it. And then come back and look at it again, and you'll see things that you never saw before.
Yeah, I have those two issues where I stare at it for so long that I've got to become blind to it, and also my monitor at work isn't calibrated, and I do too much processing on it, so I always end up processing.
What are you doing processing at work?
When else are you gonna do it?
Yeah, because my son's always on the computer at home. Either that or I'm asleep. So,
Hey, where do you get a job like that?
well, I work for myself, so
Oh, that's fair.
yeah,
Did you guys see my iPhone 6?
looks good.
I mean 6 Plus?
6 Plus, right?
It's the plus.
Yeah.
Don't bend it.
Yeah. Well, I put a post up on that the other day. I said, well, I got a piece of advice for those who are complaining about their iPhone 6 bending. Quit sitting on a $700 piece of electronics.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Awesome, thanks guys. And
Yeah.
Mike, thanks for
Thanks
bringing
again,
that
Adam, for doing this.
blending mode. So that's awesome.
All right. Well, hopefully that'll help. You know, anything I've learned from all of my millions and millions of mistakes, I'm happy to share what I learned, how to fix some of them.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
All right, guys, you all have a good one. I'm going to stop the